So, what is logic? Well, it comes from the Greek word logos, a word with layered meanings including word, reason, argument, principle, and thought. And it is the disciplined study of reasoning itself. It examines the principles and criteria of valid inference and demonstration, ultimately aiming to distinguish good reasoning from bad reasoning, and truth-preserving arguments from misleading ones. Aristotle famously defined logic as new and necessary reasoning. New because it allows us to learn what we do not yet know, and necessary because when its rules are followed, the conclusions cannot be anything other than what they are. Logic confronts foundational questions such as: what makes reasoning correct? What separates a sound argument from a flawed one? How can we reliably detect fallacies in our thinking? Logic classifies and investigates the structure of statements and arguments. It does this both through the study of formal systems of inference, where symbols follow strict rules, and through the analysis of arguments in natural language, where meaning, context, and ambiguity come into play. It focuses exclusively on propositions, declarative statements capable of being true or false, as opposed to questions, commands, or expressions of desire. Importantly, logic is not concerned with psychology, emotion, imagery, or the subjective experience of thinking, but only with the validity of inference. The domain of logic includes bedrock topics such as fallacies, which are errors in reasoning, and paradoxes, statements that challenge or break logical expectations, as well as more advanced areas like probabilistic reasoning, causal arguments, and argumentation theory, which explore how people justify claims in real contexts. For any logical system to be robust, it must satisfy three criteria: consistency, no theorem within the system contradicts another, contradictions destroy reliability; soundness, the rules of inference never lead from true premises to false conclusions; and then completeness, every statement that is true within the system's language can, at least in principle, be proven using the system's rules. Together, these qualities ensure that a logical system is stable, trustworthy, and capable of capturing all truths expressive within its framework. The history of logic stretches back thousands of years. In ancient India, early logical structures appear in the Rig Veda, which contains conceptual divisions later formalized in the fourfold pattern of the Chatuskoti, which is A, not A and not A, and not A and not A. These categories anticipate ideas that only re-emerge in the West millennia later. The Nyaya school of Indian philosophy, composed by Gautama, built one of the earliest systematic treatments of logic. Its method of inference blended induction and deduction, moving from particular cases to other particular cases through general principles. But modern logic, as we recognise it today, descends primarily from the ancient Greek tradition. Both Plato and Aristotle viewed logic as the study of argumentation, a method for analysing whether an argument is correct, coherent, and necessary. Aristotle produced 6 works on logic, collectively known as the Organon, with prior analytics often regarded as the first explicit text on formal logic in human history. He introduced 2 principles that remain cornerstones of logic today. The law of excluded middle. Every statement is either true or false. No middle state exists, i.e., the light is on. This is either true or false. There is no middle state like half true. And then the law of non-contradiction, which confusingly is sometimes called the law of contradiction. A statement cannot be both true and false in the same sense at the same time. You cannot truthfully claim, "I am asleep right now." If you are asleep, you cannot be consciously stating it. The statement cannot be both true and false at once. Aristotle is also remembered for developing the syllogism, a term of logic, a form of deductive reasoning that dominated Western thought for centuries. His students and followers, the Peripatetics, refined and expanded his logical theories. During the medieval period, the logic of Aristotle, or dialectic, became central to education. It formed one of the three pillars of the trivium: grammar, rhetoric, and logic, an intellectual foundation for the medieval liberal arts curriculum. Logic also flourished in the Islamic Golden Age. Philosophers such as Avicenna advanced the discipline dramatically. Avicennan logic introduced innovations such as hypothetical syllogism, temporal logic, modal logic, and new approaches to inductive reasoning, providing an alternative to Aristotle that deeply influenced both Eastern and Western thought. By the 18th century, Immanuel Kant proposed that logic should be understood as the science of judgment, suggesting that logical inference derives from the underlying structure of judgments themselves. Yet, he also famously claimed that Aristotle had essentially completed the field, leaving nothing further to be discovered. That claim was decisively overturned in the 20th century. The groundbreaking work of Gottlob Frege and later Alfred North Whitehead and Bertrand Russell revolutionised the entire discipline. Their symbol or system of symbolic logic, famously presented in the Principia Mathematica, dramatically expanded the scope of logical inquiry. This new logic resembled a mathematical calculus, a formal system concerned with the relations between symbols and the rules governing manipulations of those symbols. Far from merely refining Aristotle, symbolic logic incorporated classical logic as just one small part of a much broader system, laying the foundation for computer science, artificial intelligence, and modern analytical philosophy. We then come on to types of logic. Human reasoning comes in many forms, and the study of logic helps us understand and improve how we think. So let's break down the main types of logic in a way that's simple, intuitive, and perfect for real life use. You'll hear predicate logic mentioned twice, once as part of symbolic logic and once on its own, because it's not just a subcategory, it's the engine room of modern reasoning. So there's formal logic, the classical structured type. Formal logic is what you imagine when you picture philosophy professors, chalkboards, and carefully structured arguments. It deals with strict rules, no emotions, no context, just pure structure. A formal argument works like this: all mammals breathe oxygen. Whales are mammals, therefore whales breathe oxygen. If the starting points are true, the conclusion must also be true. Formal logic is airtight, but only if your premises are solid. Formalism takes this even further by saying it's not about what the symbols mean, it's about the rules we follow. You then get informal logic. It's the logic we use every day. Informal logic is the kind of reasoning you hear in conversations, debates, social media, political speeches, adverts, and everyday decision making. It's about real world thinking, where context, credibility, and clarity matter. For example, a politician says, crime is rising, so we must hire 500 more police officers. Informal logic asks, well, is crime actually rising? Would more police solve that specific issue? Or is that an emotional appeal? It also helps identify fallacies, errors in reasoning. For example, You can't trust her opinion on money. She's never been rich. That's a classic ad hominem, attacking the person instead of the idea. But coming back to the crime is rising as well, we must hire 500 more police officers. Well, if crime is rising, obviously the current police officer situation isn't working. Why would hiring any more do any better? And then we get symbolic logic, when thinking gets precision tools. Symbolic logic is where reasoning becomes almost like a language of its own. We replace long sentences with simple forms so we can see relationships clearly, avoid misunderstandings, express complex logic without confusion. Instead of saying, if it rains, I'll take an umbrella, symbolic logic turns it into a clean structure that's easier to analyse. This type of logic is the foundation of computer science, algorithms, programming, and artificial intelligence. It's how we teach machines to reason. Symbolic logic itself has two branches. Propositional logic. This deals with whole statements like, it's raining, or I'm hungry, and explores how statements interact. Things like and, or, not, and if, then. And then predicate logic. This is more advanced. It deals with objects, properties, and worlds like all, some, or at least one. For example, every student in the class owns a laptop. Predicate logic can express this structure precisely and show how the pieces relate. This forms the foundation of modern mathematics and computing. We then get mathematical logic, where math meets meaning. Mathematical logic studies how math itself works at the deepest level. It uses mathematical tools to analyse reasoning, and uses reasoning to understand mathematics. This is where major breakthroughs happen. For example, Gödel's incompleteness theorems showed something shocking. No mathematical system can explain everything without its own rules. Later, Alan Turing used mathematical logic to imagine a hypothetical machine, the Turing machine, which became the blueprint for modern computers. Mathematical logic didn't just influence computers, it created the possibility of computers. We then get deductive logic, from general to specific. Deduction is what Sherlock Holmes used. It starts with a general rule and applies it to a specific case. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. If your starting point is correct, your conclusion is guaranteed. Deductive logic gives certainty. And then you get inductive logic, which is from the specific to the general. Induction works the opposite way. It looks at many specific examples and forms a general conclusion. There's strong and weak induction. An example of strong induction would be that I've observed thousands of crows and every one was black, so it's likely that all crows are black. It's not certain, but it's reasonable. A weak induction example would be that I saw 3 red cars today, so most cars must be red. Inductive logic is the basis of science. We study patterns, test hypotheses, and draw conclusions from evidence. But there's a catch. A famous philosopher, David Hume, once said, we can't prove the future will resemble the past. We just assume it will. And then we come to modal logic, exploring possibility and necessity. Modal logic doesn't just ask, is something true? It asks, could it be true? Must it be true? Was it true? Will it be true? And should it be true? It includes categories like possibility, it might rain. Necessity, 2 plus 2 must equal 4. Time, dinosaurs used to exist. Moral obligation, you should pay your taxes. Knowledge and belief, I believe it will snow tomorrow. Modal logic helps us reason about different types of reality, not just what is, but what could be. And then we come to predicate logic, the powerhouse of modern logic. Predicate logic breaks sentences into their core components: who or what we're talking about, what properties they have, how they relate, and whether we're talking about all of them, none of them, or maybe some of them. For example, some cat is feared by every mouse. Predicate logic can translate this into a structure that shows at least one cat exists and every mouse fears that cat, or a cat. This level of precision was impossible in ancient logic systems, but now it's the backbone of mathematics, philosophy, and computing. And then we come to the more interesting stuff, fallacies and paradoxes. We'll start with fallacies first. A logic fallacy is an error in reasoning, a flaw that causes an argument to break down, even if it sounds persuasive on the surface. Fallacies weaken arguments, distort truth, and often appear in debates, media, politics, advertising, in the courtroom, and everyday decisions. Fallacies are commonly divided into two major categories: fallacies of ambiguity and contextual fallacies. Fallacies of ambiguity are occurrent when language itself misleads, when a word or structured sentence has more than one possible meaning. There are two main types. The first is equivocation. This is when one word is used in two different senses, creating a false connection between ideas. The premise is that a feather is light. The premise is what is light cannot be dark, and therefore the conclusion is a feather cannot be dark. Here the word light has two meanings. Light is not heavy and light is also bright. This argument sounds logical, but it's actually nonsense because the meanings shift. And then there's amphibole. This occurs when a sentence's structure creates ambiguity, often due to poor grammar, unclear phrasing, or misplaced modifiers. For example, I saw the man with the telescope. I saw the man with the telescope. Does this mean you had the telescope, or the man had the telescope? Let's repeat the phrase. I saw the man with the telescope. Another classic amphibole is save the whales from extinction, not from people eating them. The structure creates confusion that can mislead. You get contextual fallacies. These arise not from the words themselves, but from how they're used in context. Below are the most important types, each with a simple example. Fallacy of significance, when it's unclear whether a statement is meaningful or important. Studies show that drinking tea increases productivity by 1%. Is 1% significant? Is it within normal variation? Without context, the claim sounds impactful but may mean nothing. The fallacy of emphasis, when changing which words are emphasized alters the meaning of a sentence. For example, I didn't take his wallet. This emphasis on his implies someone else's wallet might have been taken by you. And then, I didn't take his wallet. This could suggest borrowing or moving it. Same word, different meaning depending on the emphasis. You then get fallacies of quoting out of context, removing a statement from its original situation or meaning to distort the speaker's intention. For example, I could kill him. I'm so frustrated. Pulled out of context, he said he could kill him. This becomes misleading or dangerous. And we've seen this recently with the Donald Trump situation and the BBC. You get ad hominem, where you attack the person instead of the argument. You can't trust her opinion on climate science. She failed maths in school. Her academic record doesn't invalidate the argument's truth or falsity. You get appeal to authority, assuming someone or something is true just because an expert or authority figure says so. This diet must work, a famous doctor endorsed it. Experts can be wrong. Authority does not equal evidence. You get appeal to sentiments, or appeal to emotion, using emotions instead of logic to persuade. Think of the children. We must ban all smartphones. The emotional appeal replaces actual evidence or reasoning. We get arguments from ignorance, assuming something is true because it's not been proven false, or vice versa. No one has proven aliens don't exist, therefore aliens must exist. A lack of evidence is not evidence of the opposite. Then we get begging the question, circular reasoning, using a conclusion as a premise, restating the same idea in different words, i.e. he's trustworthy because he always tells the truth. How do you know he always tells the truth? Because he's trustworthy. The conclusion is assumed from the start. We get fallacies of composition, assuming what's true of a part must be truth for the whole. Each player on this basketball team is a superstar, therefore the team must be unbeatable. Individual talent doesn't guarantee team success, and you see this in football all the time. You need the balance. There is a fallacy of division, the opposite of composition. Assuming what's true of the whole implies to each part. This cake tastes amazing, therefore each ingredient must taste amazing on their own. Flour, baking powder, raw eggs. Maybe not so tasty. The irrelevant conclusion. Addressing or proving something other than the point at issue. For example, should we invest more in public transport? Well, public transport is very popular in Europe. This doesn't answer the question. It's relevant information, but irrelevant to the conclusion being argued, and it's something that politicians do a lot. Non sequitur. It does not follow. A leap in logic where the conclusion does not logically follow the premises. She drives a luxury car. She must be rich. Maybe she is, but the conclusion does not necessarily follow. Maybe she's in debt to the car. We get fallacies of statistics, using statistics selectively or misleadingly to prove almost anything correct. We cherry pick data, we use tiny sample sizes, we present percentages without raw numbers. Our sales doubled this year. If sales went from 1 to 2, this is technically true, but highly misleading. And then we get some other famous ones. So the straw man fallacy, which is where we misrepresent someone's argument to make it easier to adapt. Should we reduce homework to help students' mental health? So basically you want kids to stop learning altogether. That's the straw man. The Texan sharpshooter fallacy. It's imagine you shoot bullets randomly at a barn wall. Then you draw targets around the bullets and claim you're an expert. You see this with people who predict things or gamble. I knew they would win, but what about all the times you were wrong? That's the Texan sharpshooter fallacy. What about the slippery slope? Arguing that a small step will inevitably lead to a chain of catastrophic events. If we allow students to redo one assignment, next they'll redo every test and every school will be meaningless. What about the false dilemma? Presenting only 2 choices when more options exist. You either support this policy fully or hate progress. That's not the case. What about red herring? Introducing irrelevant information to distract from the real issue. Again, something politicians use. We shouldn't discuss pollution right now. What about all the potholes in our roads? And then the hasty generalisation, drawing a broad conclusion from too little evidence. That person I met from that city was rude, so everyone there must be rude. Fallacies are interesting, and it's something that everyone uses. Think about your conversations. Someone might be giving you advice on a mortgage, and you might be like, well, what do you know? You live at home with your parents. Slow down when you're driving. What do you know? You haven't even got a licence. Both of those ad hominem, but you get the point. We use them and have them used against us in everyday life, and they are against general logic. And then we come to paradoxes. A paradox is a statement, idea, or situation that seems to contradict itself or defy common sense, yet often contains a deeper truth. Sometimes a paradox looks true on the surface but collapses under logic. Other times, what appears impossible is actually correct once we understand the hidden assumptions. Most paradoxes arise because something in the reasoning is unclear, an ambiguity, an unstated assumption, a hidden circularity, or a misuse of infinity. When these are uncovered, paradoxes often dissolve, and doing so has historically led to major breakthroughs in mathematics, philosophy, logic, and physics. Some paradoxes still resist resolution, like Curry's paradox, which challenges the foundations of logic itself. Paradoxes can be grouped into 4 major types. Veridical paradoxes. They seem absurd or contradictory at first, but then turn out to be true. For example, the birthday paradox. In a group of 23 people, there is a greater than 50% chance that 2 people share the same birthday. It feels impossible, yet mathematically it's true. Falsidical paradoxes. These produce a conclusion that is both absurd and actually false, usually due to a hidden mathematical or logical error. For example, the proof that 1 equals 2 by dividing both sides by 0 is stupid. This conclusion is false because dividing by 0 doesn't prove it. And then you have antinomies. These are genuine logical contradictions that arise even when standard reasoning rules are followed correctly. They reveal deep problems in the systems they're applied to. For example, Russell's paradox, the paradox of a barber who shaves all and only the men who do not shave themselves. If he shaves himself, then he shouldn't. If he doesn't, he should. This contradiction led to the development of the modern set theory. And then you have dialetheia. These are statements that can be both true and false at the same time, in exactly the same sense. Some philosophers like Graham Priest accept these in logic. Certain versions like the liar paradox, this sentence is false, are considered in this remit. Most paradoxes arise from one of the following. Self-reference. A statement refers to itself. Infinity or infinite regress. Circular reasoning or circular definitions. Vagueness. Hidden assumptions or half-truths. False premises or linguistic ambiguity. Removing the ambiguity often dissolves the paradox, but not always. So there are some other famous paradoxes, some we've covered already. For example, the classic lie paradox, we've just mentioned it. This sentence is false. But if it's true, it must be false. If it's false, it must be true. It's a statement that destroys its own truth the moment you try to pin it down. It's the whole Pinocchio thing. If Pinocchio says, my nose will grow, will it grow? We've talked about the barber's paradox, but what about the grandfather paradox? If a time traveller goes back and kills his grandfather before his parent is born, does he exist? If he does that, he can't exist. And if he can't exist, he can't go back in time. So the grandfather lives, meaning the traveller is born and can go back and kill him again. It's a travel time loop. And then you get a few of Zeno's paradoxes. The dichotomy paradox. To walk across the room, you must first go halfway, then half of the remaining half, and then half of that endlessly. How do you ever finish? He does the same with Achilles and the tortoise. That same premise of not actually catching the tortoise. And then the arrow paradox he mentions. At a single instant, an arrow in flight is motionless. If at every instant it's not moving, how does it move at all? And then the ship of Theseus, we've talked about this one before. If a ship has planks replaced one by one until none of the original wood remains, is it still the same ship? Now imagine gathering all the old planks and rebuilding another ship. Which is the real ship of Theseus? The Sorites paradox, we've talked about this one also before. If 1 grain of sand is not a heap, and 2 grains of sand is not a heap, at what point is it a heap? The Petronius paradox. Moderation in all things, including moderation. If you must be moderate even about moderation, then sometimes you should be extreme. But that itself becomes a rule which you must apply moderately. The paradoxical notice. Please ignore this notice. If you obey the sign, you're ignoring it, which means you're not ignoring it. A self-defeating instruction. The Protagoras pupil paradox. This is a really good one. A teacher tells his student he must pay for his lessons only after he wins his first case. The student doesn't pay, so the teacher sues him. If the teacher wins the case, then the student loses, meaning he still hasn't won a case and doesn't owe money. If the student wins the case, he wins his first case, meaning he must pay the teacher, but winning the case means he argued that he shouldn't have to pay. A legal loop where both sides can argue they won. Moore's paradox. It will rain tomorrow, but I don't believe it will. These statements don't logically contradict each other, but it might rain and the speaker might not believe it. But you can't coherently assert both at once. It's the paradox of communication, not logic. And people often say this, like, oh, well, this is true, but I don't necessarily believe it. That's Moore's paradox. You've probably heard of Schrodinger's cat, where the cat in the box is both alive and dead at the same time. And then turtles all the way down. A myth described that Earth rests on a giant turtle. When asked what the turtle stands on, the answer is another turtle, and beneath that another turtle, and so on forever. And it's something we talked about before in Agrippa's trilemma. It's the infinite regressal argument. Why is that the case? Because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this, and it ends, it goes on indefinitely. So, logic's very interesting. There's the core aspects of logic, and then there's the paradoxes and fallacies that actually make you question logic. So how can you begin to use this in your own life?